For decades, Janet Jackson was untouchable, a pop icon, a trailblazer, a survivor of a legendary but deeply troubled dynasty. With her fierce choreography, whispered vocals, and a fearless sense of identity, she carved out a space where few women of color had ever stood. But behind the fame, behind the platinum albums and sold-out tours, lay a story the cameras never fully captured. A story of betrayal, isolation, and a silence that grew louder with every passing year. Because while the world celebrated her legacy, Janet was quietly carrying a burden few could imagine. She had been controlled, shamed, blacklisted, and even erased from history by the very industry she helped shape. And now, at 59, as fans wonder where she's gone, what she's been through, and why her voice has become so distant, the heartbreaking truth is beginning to surface. From childhood trauma in the shadow of the Jackson family, to the brutal fallout from the Super Bowl scandal that changed her career overnight, Janet has faced unimaginable pain behind her carefully guarded public persona. Those close to her say the emotional scars have never fully healed, and that the price of resilience may have been her peace. So what really happened to Janet Jackson? Why did one of the greatest performers of our time disappear from the spotlight just when the world needed her most? And what devastating truths has she hidden beneath a lifetime of whispers and wounds? Stay with us, because once you understand the full weight of Janet Jackson's tragedy, you'll never see her the same way again. Long before she was a global icon, Janet Jackson was just a little girl in a famous house where innocence was a luxury no one could afford. Born the youngest of 10 in the legendary Jackson family, Janet entered a world already shaped by cameras, contracts, and control. While most children were playing in parks or dreaming of their first school dance, Janet was being molded, managed, and maneuvered into the spotlight by a father whose discipline was legend and feared. Joe Jackson didn't raise children. He raised performers. From the moment Janet could walk, she was surrounded by pressure to be perfect, to be polished, to be profitable. By the time she was 7, she was already acting on television. By 16, she had released 2 albums, not because she asked to, but because it was expected. Behind her soft voice and gentle smile was a girl who had no say in her own life. She later admitted that for much of her childhood she felt like a puppet, just another product in the Jackson brand. And though her brothers had already become household names, the expectations on Janet were even more severe. She wasn't just expected to succeed. She had to redeem the family's name, carry the legacy, and forge a new chapter while the entire world watched. But few knew what that weight was doing to her soul. In private, she battled self-doubt, body shame, and a deep longing for freedom. Her father controlled everything: what she wore, where she went, how she spoke. There was no room for vulnerability, no time to breathe, and through it all, Janet remained quiet, because in that house, silence was survival. Even when she married young in secret, desperate for escape, it was quickly annulled by her family. Her life wasn't hers, not yet. And though her breakout album Control would later symbolize her fight for independence, most fans never realized just how literal that title was. Janet wasn't just breaking into the music scene, she was breaking free. Free from the emotional prison of her childhood, free from the suffocating grip of her father, free from a past that never let her grow up on her own terms. But the scars remained. Because when you've been forced to perform from the time you can barely speak, the line between who you are and who you're told to be begins to blur. Even in her adult success, Janet often wrestled with identity, privacy, and peace. And though she smiled in interviews and danced flawlessly on stage, the pain of never having a true childhood, of never being protected, followed her. She learned to bury it, to channel it into art, but deep down, the little girl who was never allowed to be one still cried for something softer, something safer, something real. And as Janet's career soared, so did the emotional cost. Because the spotlight that had once felt like an escape was now a cage of its own, one where her every move, every word, every relationship was scrutinized, twisted, and commodified. And no matter how much success she achieved, she was always running from the wounds she was never allowed to show. Wounds the world refused to see until it was too late. It was meant to be just another triumphant moment in Janet Jackson's iconic career, a halftime performance at the 2004 Super Bowl, watched by millions, a celebration of music, energy and spectacle. But in the span of half a second, her life was changed forever. What occurred that night, the now infamous wardrobe malfunction with Justin Timberlake, wasn't just a televised mishap. It became a cultural execution, one where Janet, not Justin, was forced to bear the full weight of outrage. She was vilified by the media, blacklisted from major networks, her music pulled from radio stations, and her character torn apart as though she had orchestrated a global act of indecency. The NFL demanded apologies. CBS imposed fines. MTV washed their hands of her. But what was most disturbing was how quickly the world turned on her. A black woman, standing alone in a firestorm, while her white male counterpart walked away virtually untouched, his career untouched, his image salvaged. For Janet, this wasn't just professional fallout. It was emotional devastation. After years of reclaiming her narrative, fighting to be seen not just as a Jackson but as herself, she was once again silenced, this time by a system that punished her more for the perception of impropriety than any actual offense. The humiliation was relentless. The headlines were cruel. Late-night hosts made her the punchline of every joke. And while the industry claimed to uphold values of decency and family, it was really about power. Janet had always been unapologetic, sensual, commanding. And in a world that still struggles to let women, especially black women, own their sexuality without being punished for it, she was made into an example. The cost was staggering. Album sales dipped. Endorsements disappeared. Opportunities dried up. But beyond the business damage was the emotional wound. Janet had been erased from the very stage she helped define. And for a woman who had spent her life fighting to step out from behind her famous brothers to build a name on her own talent, it was a betrayal beyond comprehension. Still, Janet didn't lash out. She didn't publicly attack Timberlake or demand retribution. She retreated, with dignity, with grace, but deeply wounded. In interviews, you could see the pain behind her eyes. She was too poised to say it outright, but it was there, in the silences, the pauses, the sadness in her smile. She had been burned not by accident, but by the hypocrisy of an industry that claimed to embrace her, only to abandon her the moment it became uncomfortable. And what made it worse? The world watched it happen and said nothing. For years she carried that pain quietly. Her career continued, but the momentum had shifted. The industry had branded her as controversial, risky, and yet all she had done was show up. The tragedy wasn't the incident, it was the reaction to it. And for Janet, who had already endured a lifetime of emotional suppression and public scrutiny, this scandal didn't just derail her. It deepened the loneliness she had fought to escape her entire life. She was left asking a question too many women have asked in the aftermath of injustice. Why me? And why was no one there to stand beside me? In the years that followed the Super Bowl fallout, Janet Jackson's public presence became more controlled, more selective, and ultimately more distant. Though she continued to create music, release albums, and perform for loyal fans, something had clearly changed. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed. The playful confidence that once lit up stages began to fade into something more cautious, more guarded. Behind the glamour, the truth was painful. Janet was battling invisible wars that few people could see. The pressure to maintain a public image while privately crumbling under the weight of trauma became suffocating. Her personal life, too, was unraveling in silence. Years of romantic instability had left her emotionally drained. Most notably, her third marriage to Wissam Al-Mana, a Qatari billionaire whose relationship with Janet began with promise, but ended in emotional isolation. Janet had once described him as her soulmate, but friends later revealed she had become a shadow of herself during the marriage, subdued, silenced, and slowly erased. The relationship reportedly grew controlling, with whispers that her independence was discouraged, her freedom stifled, and even her appearance altered to suit her husband's preferences. And while Janet remained fiercely private, the fact that she fled the marriage just months after giving birth to her first and only child at age 50 spoke volumes. Motherhood had long been a dream Janet never thought she'd live to see. And while she embraced it with love, the timing was cruel. Alone, healing from a broken relationship, and attempting to protect her child from the same public scrutiny that had scarred her own life. Add to that a family legacy that continued to weigh heavily on her, new scandals, public court cases, and the growing distance between her and her famous siblings. Janet had always been the quiet one, the protector, the peacemaker. But now she was simply exhausted. Her body began to reflect that emotional wear. There were reports of stress-induced illness, yo-yoing weight fluctuations, and periods of complete withdrawal from the spotlight. Her team denied health rumors, but the silence spoke louder than any denial. And while fans speculated, Janet said little. She had learned, perhaps too well, that vulnerability often came at a cost. The world had shown her what it does to women who dare to fall apart in public. And so she retreated, disappearing from the stage that once made her shine. Occasionally she would resurface, an award show appearance here, a heartfelt Instagram post there. But it was clear that something within her had broken. The cumulative toll of a life lived under relentless pressure, betrayal, scrutiny, and silence had hollowed out parts of her spirit. And even as she smiled, one couldn't help but wonder how much pain still echoed behind her eyes. Because the tragedy of Janet Jackson isn't just the scandals or the career setbacks, it's the loneliness of being unseen in plain sight. A woman whose name is known by millions, but whose pain has rarely been acknowledged with the compassion it deserves. She had given the world everything, her childhood, her voice, her vulnerability, and in return, the world left her to grieve in private. And yet, through it all, Janet never asked for pity. Only space, only peace. Only the freedom to breathe after a lifetime of being told how to move, speak, sing, and live. But the question lingers, after surviving so much, is peace even possible for someone like Janet Jackson? As Janet Jackson quietly approaches 60, there is a haunting truth that lingers beneath the surface of her legacy. Despite all she's given, despite everything she's survived, she is still fighting for peace in a world that refuses to let her rest. She is not the scandal they tried to pin on her, nor the shadow of her famous brothers, nor the vulnerable woman the industry pushed into silence. She is a survivor of childhood control, industry betrayal, public humiliation, and private heartbreak. And yet even now the world doesn't quite know what to do with Janet Jackson. The media occasionally remembers her when anniversaries come around, or when someone else revisits the Super Bowl debacle. But it's always about the past, never about the person she is today. Rarely does anyone ask how she's really doing, what she's had to heal from, or whether she ever found the wholeness she spent her life seeking. The tragedy of Janet's story isn't that she failed, because she didn't. She broke records. She sold out arenas. She changed pop music forever. The tragedy is that even after all that, she was never allowed to be fully human. Her strength became expected, her silence mistaken for peace. But strength built on survival is not the same as joy, and silence born of trauma is not healing. Behind the stage lights, behind the rehearsed smiles and graceful comebacks, is a woman who has spent most of her life trying to hold herself together while the world pulled her apart. And now, as she grows older, more distant from the industry that once demanded every piece of her, she seems to be doing what she always longed for, retreating into a quieter life. Not in defeat, but in self-preservation. She is raising her son with a fierce sense of privacy, shielding him from the fame that swallowed her childhood whole. She is choosing when and where she appears, no longer dancing for approval but for herself. Yet even in this self-imposed quiet, the weight of her journey remains. Fans still whisper about her health, her isolation, her sadness, and maybe they always will. Because the world struggles to make peace with women who don't conform, who don't explain, who don't perform endlessly. But Janet Jackson doesn't owe us explanations. What she deserves is grace. The kind of grace rarely given to women who dare to walk away from a spotlight that never truly protected them. Her story is not just one of fame and tragedy. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when we celebrate talent but ignore the human behind it. A woman who, for all her power, was never truly free. And now, at 59, perhaps her greatest rebellion isn't in another chart-topping single or another comeback tour. Perhaps it's in choosing herself, in finally stepping out of the cage built by fame, family, and fear, and learning how to breathe. And if the world truly wants to honor Janet Jackson, it won't be through documentaries or headlines or awards. It will be by finally letting her have what she was denied from the very beginning. The right to be seen, not as a legend, but as a woman, wounded, resilient, quiet, and still standing.